This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. All right, it's time to get the last two position reviews of the year out the way. We're going to start, or this video is just going to be about the safety. Special teams will be another one you guys will see later on. But let's talk about this safety room. Is this safety room enough? Are we relying a little bit too much on a perspective jump for Grant Delpit? Or is the safety room just about the right amount of eye? You know what I mean? Let's look at it right now. Let's look at the entire room. You got Rodney McLeod, who was the highest ranked safety last year, according to Pro Football Focus. He's not even going to start. Juan Thornhill, Grant Delpit, DeAnthony Bell, Ronnie Hickman, and Bubba Bowden. So right off the bat, let's just kind of talk about the three main guys that are going to be in this rotation. You sub out John Johnson from last year, you put in Juan Thornhill. You sub out Ronnie Harrison from last year, you put in Rodney McLeod, and you put in Grant Delpit from Grant Delpit's spot last year. Now, first question is, hey, is Grant Delpit deserving of being the only safety from this room last year that returns? And I would say yes. I think Grant Delpit was one of the better players in the second half of the season for the Cleveland Browns, especially in a run-stopping capacity. I think he was one of the best players that the Browns had on defense. If you look at run stops from week 9 to 18, Grant Delpit had 17 run stops. That's more than Myles Garrett. That's more than JOK. That's more than Jordan Elliott. That's more than any linebacker, any edge rusher, any defensive tackle on the team. Now, does it say something that the safety in the second half of the season led the team in run stops? 100%. It says something about the quality of that defensive line at that point of the year, but still, it's a pretty good number for Grant Delpit to build off of. And I think what's most interesting about Grant Delpit as he kind of molds or gets molded into what his role is going to be in the NFL is how different that is than what we imagine him to be. Because originally you brought on John Johnson because you thought Grant could be more of a free safety. You could let John play a little bit of strong, some linebacker here, and really do what Grant's doing. But what happened was that Grant ended up becoming more of a John Johnson. So you needed more of a true free safety, which brings us to Juan Thornhill. Now, Juan Thornhill's job isn't to be spectacular. Juan Thornhill's probably not going to make a ton of plays on the ball, but what you do want Juan Thornhill to be is a safety valve. What you need him to be is that. And I think he'll be that. I think he'll be fine in that safety valve position. Again, we don't need him to get a ton of interceptions. We don't need him to get a ton of pass breakups. What we need him to do is be able to manage the defense, to be able to make sure that we don't get beat consistently down the field. Because if you look at this team's coverage numbers, play to play, they were actually pretty decent in coverage last year. The issue with the Cleveland Browns for the last couple of years has been busted coverage. This team has had busted coverage issues for a little while. And those issues come from inconsistent play and basically non-existent play from a free safety perspective, right? You've basically had three strong safeties on the field at each time, all trying to play strong safety. None of them playing free. Now you have a true free safety option in Juan Thornhill. You have a veteran in Rodney McLeod. And I think that's going to allow the flexibility that you need to let Grant Delpit be closer to the line of scrimmage and make plays. Again, Grant's probably not going to get a ton of interceptions, but I do expect him to be in on screens, right? Like that's where Grant's really going to dominate is screens. When teams try to attack horizontally because they get tired of the Browns pass rush, that's where Grant's going to shine. I think Grant's going to really benefit from the upgraded defensive line, especially now that the Browns brought in Shelby Harris. Now they have a true defensive tackle. I think Grant's going to be the beneficiary of a lot of the moves here on the roster. And I think that Rodney McLeod is not an unimportant part of this puzzle because, again, another thing that this team lacked when you look at the Joe Woods era, and it was something that I was critical of at the time, was Joe Woods, because he was so inexperienced, did not have a guy in the locker room that he could trust. And what I mean by that is, if you pay close attention to when these assistant coaches, coordinator level coaches go to new teams, there's usually a handful of players on a list that they'll call, and one of them will follow them. Happens every year. You bring in a Philadelphia Eagles old defensive coordinator, all of a sudden you get an old Philadelphia Eagle to join the room. Now, why is that? Because each coordinator, every coach, needs a couple of guys who they can trust what they're hearing from the locker room perspective, what they're hearing from the on-field perspective, and be able to kind of put that into their game planning. These things could be anything from locker room issues, from on-field issues. Coaches are just not going to have the same level of perspective that players are going to have about what's going on with the team because coaches aren't on the field. You need somebody on the field to give that information to the coaches. If you don't have that, you could be running blind. Joe Woods never had that. I don't know who his guy was, but he never had that. The reason Rodney McLeod is here is, one, because he's a good safety. He's a good player. He's a really good player. But two, because he has a great relationship with Jim Schwartz. So when guys are upset about Jim Schwartz's role, and you know how it is at work, you don't complain to the boss unless it's gotten to a certain point. Everybody is like, oh, if they have a problem with the defense, even if it's slight, just talk to Jim Schwartz. You lying, because at your job, you don't complain about something until it hits the absolute point to where you're ready to quit about it. Let's be real. We all know how that goes. Football's a job, just like your job's a job. They just get paid more than likely. So a lot of times, if you don't have a real good relationship with who's in your locker room, you can lose track of that kind of stuff. And guys are upset. And they're upset and they have nobody to really vent to about this, or nobody who can kind of give them a better perspective about the situation. And then it bubbles, and then people quitting. Got Jadeveon Clowney refusing to do his job. That's what happens when you don't have a relationship with the locker room. You don't have a relationship with any of the players in the locker room. Jim Schwartz, being a veteran coach, he brought in Rodney McLeod because he has a good relationship with Rodney McLeod. Rodney McLeod, it's a symbiotic relationship, right? Rodney McLeod knows that Jim Schwartz is always going to be looking for him. So he's always going to be able to get a job as long as he's playing well enough and Jim Schwartz is in the league. Jim Schwartz benefits from the relationship because he gets an eye on what's going on in the locker room. So let's say a player is kind of upset about their role, right? I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing here, this and that. Well, Rodney McLeod can talk to him and try to straighten things out. If he's not successful in that, he's aware enough to be like, hey, Jim, you got some guys that aren't really that happy. We need to find a way to address this in the defense, and you can solve these locker room issues before they bubble over. Same thing from an on-the-field perspective, right? Because that's just the locker room perspective. The reason you need to have somebody like that on the field perspective is, hey, sometimes stuff goes wrong. Guys get confused on what the coverage is. You need somebody to have the final word, right? Because everybody in the NFL is a football genius at that point, right? Like, everybody has their doctorate, but you need somebody to have the final word. The person who has the closest relationship and the most experience with this defensive coordinator is going to have the final say. So if a coverage gets busted down and you see Denzel Ward pointing at the safety and the safety pointing at Denzel Ward, Rodney McLeod's there to be like, no, you were supposed to be here. This is here. I've ran this coverage a million times. I'm telling you, this is what Jim wants you to do. Problem solved. Right? Because if we keep arguing about whose fault the problem was, the problem never gets solved as long as we're looking for who's at fault. The problem only gets solved once we know what went wrong, who was right, so we can fix it. That's it. That's the real functional reason, outside of him being a good player, that a person like him is really useful to veteran coaches. So Rodney McLeod, he's a much more important piece to this team then I think people understand. And for those specific reasons, I think he's going to be a worthwhile addition. So we talked about Juan's necessary need here. We talked about Grant's need here. We talked about Rodney McLeod's need. Let's talk about some of the backup guys. Really, the only guy I find interesting here is DeAnthony Bell, because he was such a playmaker last year in preseason. I want to see if he makes those plays this year or if he gets usurped by one of the younger guys on the roster. But as of right now, I think DeAnthony probably makes the roster, or at least the practice squad. The supplements for this roster at safety, you're going to use some AJ Green to supplement these guys, and you're going to use some JOK to supplement these guys, especially in base packages, to cover some of that slot tight end responsibility stuff there. And I think those are fine enough supplements. If I had to give this team a rating on depth, I would give them a spare tire rating. But here's the one thing with this room that I am a little concerned about, and it's that Rodney McLeod is a good player individually. Juan Thornhill is a good player individually, and Grant Delpit is a good player individually. These three have not played at all ever with each other. I don't know how long it's going to take to build that chemistry, but that is something to take note of. But overall, if I had to give this room a grade, I would give it a B. It's not the greatest room, but it's more than serviceable. You have some potential for somebody to have a little bit of a breakout, whether it be Juan Thornhill, whether it be Grant Delpit, more likely Grant Delpit. I think this is a good room. I wouldn't say it's a great room, but it's a good room. I think you're fine here. You still don't want to have any real serious injuries, because more than one injury, you're going to be in real trouble here. But I think you'll be fine here. That's my thoughts about the safety room. Let me know what your thoughts are in the comment section down below. Y'all have a great day. Have an even better night.